Okay, welcome to Cylinder Radio. Viewpoint diversity is the name of the game here, trying to understand all perspectives on controversial issues. And I'm going to do a review today of Am I Racist? The Matt Walsh documentary comedy that's in theaters right now. I understand this world very, very well. It's kind of how I started to grow on social media. I was, as far as I know, the only public-facing classroom teacher who was speaking out against things like critical social justice, CRT, critical race theory, and DEI. Not a lot of teachers were talking about it, especially in like the summer of 2020 when the George Floyd protests and everything were happening. It was all kind of like a monolith, one side saying, you know, what you're supposed to do and put the little black box up in your bio and all of that kind of stuff. And there just weren't teachers who were speaking out against it. So that's when I started to speak out against it. So I understand this world very well. I had James Lindsay on the podcast and a whole bunch of other people, Eric Smith, a whole bunch of experts in this. I've also had people who were on both sides of this issue on the podcast, talking about ethnic studies and a whole bunch of different areas. And I've done some Instagram lives with people. I actually love talking to people who are woke, for lack of a better term, because I'm very curious. And I really want to understand it. It's not simply, I just want to expose that you're an idiot. It's not what it is. I want to really understand why you believe this stuff. Why is this your operating system? I just don't understand it because it seems so incoherent to me. And that's kind of where I've arrived. But as far as Matt Walsh goes, I have had my issues with Matt Walsh as well. And the issue that I have with Matt Walsh isn't so much what he says, it's how he says it. And that matters. So, and sometimes it is also what he says, but he famously, here's a good example, is he famously made a tweet against Dylan Mulvaney, where he calls Dylan Mulvaney all kinds of terrible names. And as like a Jesus person, I'm a Christian. So like I think that what that means is that you try to live as close to the way Jesus lived and taught as possible. And there's a scene in the Bible where Jesus is having dinner with like tax collectors who are like the worst, prostitutes, sinners, and the Pharisees, the religious leaders, come up and they're like, how can you dine with these people? And he said, it's the sick that are in need of a doctor, not the healthy. And I think that when what Matt Walsh tries to do, and he tries to do in this movie too, is he ridicules people that he disagrees with, or he ridicules people that have bad ideas, or he also ridicules people that have some sort of mental disorder. Because if you believe that trans people have a mental disorder, which he does, he says Dylan Mulvaney or trans people have a mental disorder, and then in the same breath starts ridiculing them. And I think that, calling that out and saying that is not the ideal, that's going to turn more people away from trying to learn more about Christianity and stuff. I think it's a real problem. So I've had my issues with Matt Walsh in the past. I think that he doesn't want to engage with people that will really challenge his ideas in the same way. He kind of goes for the low hanging fruit. But I went to this with an open mind to try and see, because if he's trying to expose the grift and the dangers of this, that's where I'm at. I'm trying to expose it because I have landed on the belief that this is bad, for lack of a better term, this critical social justice, woke stuff, especially when it comes to, gender and race. There could be a bunch of different things. So I went into the theater. I had to find a theater because I'm in Los Angeles. So to find a theater that was playing a Daily Wire movie was, a bit of a journey. But then I went there and there's maybe 10 other people in the whole theater. So it wasn't very popular. The movie starts off with him, in costume. He dresses up as, like a soy boy, I guess you could call it, like a woke person. And so he starts on a news show with doing a land acknowledgement. Now, land acknowledgements, if you don't know, is when you start off like a talk or an event with an acknowledgement of the indigenous cultures that were on that land before colonization. Now, the issue with this is, it's a whole bunch of things. One is, it's just, what are you supposed to do about it? Acknowledge it. What does acknowledging do? What does that do? It doesn't do anything. It makes you just feel guilty. It's one. Another thing is, when you understand Native American cultures, like that land was not just held by one tribe. One tribe had it, then another tribe warred with that tribe and then took it over, and then another one came in, and like it was always changing hands. it's like property now. You buy a house, then you sell the house, and whatever it is. So when you want to do a land acknowledgement, who exactly are you acknowledging? The one that was there before like white colonists took over, because they were probably the most brutal because they were holding on to it at the time, or the ones who were first there? Like, who exactly are you acknowledging? And it just seems like a lot of virtue signaling nonsense. That's kind of my take. It doesn't do anything. If you say like, all right, well, let's acknowledge and then give that land back or something, then that's like action behind it. But just saying these words, I think that, I'm always reminded of the Ross Perot quote of an activist is someone who cleans up the river, not says the river is dirty. And this is just saying like, our history is dirty. Okay. Yeah. All right, great. But it starts out with a land acknowledgement, and then he talks about how he is a certified DEI expert. I'm not certified, but I would say that I am, to a fairly decent degree, a DEI expert, because this is something that I've been talking about for a very long time. So I can explain this objectively, also because I've tried very hard to steelman the position of being woke or being, in support of DEI or CRT or any of those things. This movie was a good reminder of everything that happened in 2020. It was like early COVID. There was that horrific video of George Floyd being kneeled on and dying after like a series of a whole bunch of others, Eric Gardner and Philandro Castile and Sandra Bland. I mean, some of these stories are really, really terrible. Just like terrible. They're not always racial though. Tony Timpa's story and the George Floyd story are so close. But Tony Timpa's white. You'd never heard of him. And George Floyd is black. And he is like, a household name. Daniel Shaver is another terrible story. And you can look up the video on YouTube, but be warned because he does get shot. But it's a white kid. It's a father, young guy, who gets shot. And it's just a terrifying situation. So the police brutality element that was around during the George Floyd time is not just against black people. It's black and white. Now, Roland Fryer, who was an economist at Harvard, did one of the best studies on racism and policing that's ever been done. And he found that black people were not more likely to be killed by police, but they were more likely to be stopped, harassed, tased, beat up, and things like that, which is not to be ignored. You look at the stop and frisk policy in New York, and certain demographics were stopped and frisked more than other demographics. It was not equal. It's not like, this population is 20% in New York, so they get stopped 20% of the time. It wasn't like that. Certain people were stopped a lot more. And you could say, well, look at the demographics of who's committing the crime, so we're going to go after those people. But it's a chicken or the egg thing. If, as a teacher, I say, I'm going to look through the book bags of everyone wearing glasses, or far more people wearing glasses than aren't, and then I find more stuff because I'm just looking at more book bags by that population, then I could make the correlation to say, well, people with glasses have more contraband. But if I'm stopping them and looking through their stuff more, then I'm more likely to find something. So there is an element of this that is true. If there wasn't a kernel of truth to this, then it wouldn't go anywhere. When I was brought on Fox News on Shannon Bream's show. And she said, she had like a panel on, and it was all these people talking about CRT, and they're all saying that it's nonsense. And I was like, it's not nonsense. The war on drugs is a good example of how CRT could expose that there are racial issues behind this, even though it's not on its front. So if you don't know what critical race theory is, it's like goggles that you wear to look for possible racism in law. Started by Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and people from the Harvard Law School. And it's like, just because a law doesn't mention race does not mean it's racist. Okay. The war on drugs, John Ehrlichman was very clear. We did this to try and lock up black people. Okay. But it doesn't say that. But then you can look at like the comments, you can look at how it resulted in mass incarceration of certain populations over other populations. And you go, oh, there might be racism here. So you put on those goggles, you go, oh, there might be racism there. Where's the racism? And then you take the goggles off and you challenge that. The problem with what a lot of people do with CRT is they don't take those goggles off. They look for racism everywhere. They look for problems everywhere. There's another Supreme Court case, Yik Wo, I believe what it was called. It was going after Chinese immigrants who had laundromats in San Francisco. And they wanted to shut down the Chinese laundromats, But they couldn't do that. So what they did was they said, you're not allowed to have a laundromat in brick buildings because the brick buildings were more inexpensive. That's where all the Chinese immigrants were building the laundromats. So they went after the brick buildings as a way to go after the Chinese people. So that's an example of how critical race theory could be used to see, like, is this a racist law that just wasn't intended to be a racist law? But this is a good reminder of how during the George Floyd time and all those riots and protests and stuff, people just bought into this. They just bought into a hook, line, and sinker. It's just like they're almost like zombies, And like Robin DiAngelo was on the Tonight Show, and it was just over and over and over again. The Black Fist and the BLM and all of that stuff. It's like, wow, people really, really just went along with it. I think because people are intending to be good, they want to be good, and they just don't know how to be good. And you look at something that's obviously bad, racism. We all know racism is bad. So being against racism, being an anti-racist is obviously good. It's just overly simplistic. But the term anti-racist sounds so good that you go, I'm an anti-racist. That's why Ibram Kendi says you can't be, you're either racist or you're an anti-racist. There is no not racist. Well, it's not true. Like, it's not like instead of racist, just change the C to a P. You're either a rapist or you're an anti-rapist, like out doing the work to stop rape. Like, no, you could just not be a rapist, right? So it doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold any kind of coherent language, which is another thing we saw in the film. But the people who attend these workshops, he holds these workshops and goes to these workshops throughout the film. They just seem very lost to me. They seem lost. They just seem like they don't know how to be a good person. Is this the abandonment of moral codes like religion? I don't know. I would tend to believe so. That if you don't have a guidebook on how to be a good person or how to act, then you're going to go with what the world says. And the world says this thing's wrong, then you go against that. And people are going to these workshops and paying a lot of money because I think that they are just very lost. In one of the scenes where they're in a workshop, it's like earlier on in the film, he keeps asking questions because that's part of it. It's like, am I racist? He keeps asking just these detailed questions. Can I do this? Or what about this? Or what about this? And one of the things that the woman who was operating it, who got paid something crazy, $30,000 or something like that. The money issue is another thing in this film, just how much money is in this stuff. But he kept asking questions. What she said was, if there's another question, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. That is so on the nose of what my biggest issue with critical race theory, DEI, wokeness is. The unwillingness to engage, the unwillingness to talk, the unwillingness to challenge your ideas. Ibram X. Kendi, who was a real thought leader in this world, was challenged by Coleman Hughes, to have a conversation live. They would sell tickets. Coleman Hughes said, we'll sell tickets and we'll donate all of the ticket money to the United Negro College Fund. And Ibram Kendi turned that down. He will not engage. I mean, this is a black man talking to another black man about race. Should be easy, but they will not talk. So one of the things that Matt Walsh does is he has to dress up after being exposed that he's Matt Walsh. He had to dress up in like a costume. So he puts on different glasses and he puts on a man bun and short pants and stuff like that. And was this surreptitious? Was this sneaky and stuff like that? Yeah. Was it necessary to do that? Maybe. There were a lot of people who didn't want to engage with me during the 2020, 2021, 2022 when I was talking about all this stuff because of the way I look. Because I am like a waspy guy. I'm a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant heterosexual male over 6 feet tall. So I look like the enemy according to Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality. Intersectionality is if you're black, that's like one of the oppressed elements. If you're white, that's an oppressor. Okay, if you're a man, that's an oppressor. If you're a woman, it's oppressed. So if you're a black woman, you're double oppressed. And then you can add that up. If you're a black woman who's a Muslim, then you're triple oppressed. You're a black woman who's a Muslim and disabled, then it's like quadrupled. So it's just like, it's this idea of if you see the world, so much of this stuff is like wokeness is seeing the world through a lens of oppressor and oppressed. Everything's through power, and people are using that power to oppress others, or they're being oppressed. And what you see is the response is not to eliminate this oppressor versus oppressed, or eliminate this idea that they think where everything's contingent upon power, which I don't think that's true. There's so much charity that's out in the world that has nothing to do with power. But the approach is, if it has to do with power, then I'm going to get the power. So it's just turning this the oppressor and the oppressed, white Protestant males or whatever at the top, and then black Muslim women at the bottom. Instead, you want to inverse that. So you want to put black Muslim women at the top and white Protestant males at the bottom. And when you understand that human beings are human beings, we're all just people. So people are going to act like people. Then that's obviously a bad plan. But the anti-curiosity element of this, the punishing curiosity element of this is the problem. It's one of the biggest reasons why I started Patterdocs, my online education platform, is I've talked to so many kids that said, I can't ask questions in school about certain topics. And teachers saying, I will not address these questions. They're questions from children. You're out of your mind. There is nothing off limits to be curious about. Okay. I was told in a conversation I had with some people about race who were on that side, some things are not open for debate. Absolutely not. Look, I came to faith through watching debates. So if God is open to debate, and I think God should be open to debate, then everything beneath God, which is everything, should be open for debate. So thoughtful people are going to have questions. Okay, that's just what it is. And when you are punished for your curiosity, I think that's going to just be a clear sign that the one punishing curiosity is in the wrong. Anyone who cultivates curiosity is in the right, which is why I think that I believe that. And so why I lean into so much curiosity. There was the woman who was a college student who called out some kids in a library, and she just seems so lost. A lot of the people who were running this stuff, who were paid a lot of money to be DEI experts, things, they just seem angry, like really angry. I think they believe what they're doing, but they also do not want to look deep into it. So the anger that so many people have because they've been wronged by society, or they feel like they've been wronged by society, so much of this ideology is about victimization and how they're a victim, they're oppressed. So if you see yourself as that, and you want to focus on how you've been oppressed over and over and over again, which you can do, I can do it, you can do it. We can look at so many ways that we've been victims in this world. I've been very sick throughout my life, spent a lot of time in the hospital throughout my life. Like, I could look at how I'm a victim all the time. Sometimes I do, okay? But this ideology is focus on victimhood, focus on how you're oppressed. You know, one of the things that was said in this is it's important to feel bad. You should feel bad about what has happened in your country or to these people. How is that going to serve? Making people feel bad only serves if they do something about it. So it's to prompt action, to animate you. You feel bad, so you'll be animated to go do something good. In the film, he makes a petition to change the George Washington Monument to the George Floyd Monument, making it bigger, painting it black. And people sign this thing like blindly. Most of them just sign it blindly, okay? And it's because they want to be good people, especially if they're on camera. Just look, I'm a good person, I'm a good person, I'm a good person. And I think people want to be good people. But if you don't have a moral code, you don't have a guidebook that says this is right, this is wrong. And that's what sinning is. It's missing the mark, missing the ideal. If you don't have anything like that, you don't believe in sin, you don't believe in like the philosophical arguments of Plato and Aristotle about morality, or Immanuel Kant, his categorical imperative, or religious texts, like, then where are you getting your morality from? You're just kind of taking it in based on what people will shame you for in society. And that's what I saw over and over and over again, is people are just like, yeah, I'll do this because I've been told by the world it's the right thing to do. And there's just, that is beautiful, the fact that people actually want to do the right thing, but it shows a lack of courage and self-confidence because people know they're buying into nonsense, but they just won't say it. So there's a real lack of courage in society, and there's a real lack of confidence in society to push back against these ideologies that are so clearly incoherent and make you feel worse. Matt Walsh at one point went to like he went to a biker bar, and turned out that a lot of the bikers were just like, I don't care what color skin you have, which is, that's the movement that Martin Luther King called for, whether or not that's true, at least they know what to say. That was not what was said, just a few generations ago. But then they went to like a poor black community. And what was interesting there is the people in the black community who did not look at themselves like victims and did not buy into a lot of the wokeness, they were Christian. They were religious. And that gives them a moral code to avoid it. The reason I was able to speak out about this stuff in 2020 is I was teaching at a modern Orthodox Jewish school. And that matters because wokeness did not capture that school. Why? Because they have the 10 Commandments. They have the Torah. They have an operating system about morality. There's a clear book. Do this, don't do this. Eat this, don't eat this. Do this, don't do this. They don't have to buy into these new critical social justice matrices about how to behave. So I was able to speak out about it, but that's so rare. But you need some sort of lens to look at the world and decide what is right or wrong. If you don't have that, then you're more likely to fall into this stuff. When he brought up, Robin DiAngelo to one of these poor black people in like the deep South, the guy said, I don't read Robin DiAngelo, I read the Bible. It's like, just love each other. He's like, it's simple, just love each other. Like, it sounds simple, it sounds cliche. I know Lex Friedman says that all the time and you kind of roll your eyes, but like, that's what we're called to do. You love one another. And I think that Matt Walsh doesn't show that enough, loving these people who are wrong-headed. And I definitely think that they don't show it enough, loving people. The Sesame Place woman, there was a woman who, her kids were like shunned by like one of the Sesame Place characters, like didn't shake their hands or high five them or something like that. And she had a big lawsuit, and she came and she said, I don't want to talk about it. But then when they offered $50,000, she was willing to talk about it. So, are you taking a moral stance that you'll give up for money? Then how much of a stance is that? If you will give up your morals for money, that speaks volume about your character. But she didn't even know if the person in the costume was white or black. This goes back to Michelle Obama told a story that she was at like a bakery or something, an ice cream shop, and a white man butted in front of her because he didn't know that she was the first lady. He's like, that's what it's like to be a black woman. It's like, you don't know that. How do you know that he's not just an a-hole? You don't know, but that's what critical race theory is my black kids were shunned by the Sesame Street character because the Sesame Street character is racist. Maybe, but maybe not. So you put on those lenses and then you take them off and you look into it more. Who's in the costume? If it's a black person who's a member of the NAACP, maybe they just didn't see through that costume. It's hard to see through the costume, right? But she didn't even know who was in the costume. Now, if it's a white person and you go to their house, and they have Confederate flags up and stuff like that, then it's like, oh yeah, they shun my black kids because they're black. But you have to be curious. You have to investigate more. But it's like any opportunity to be a victim and then cash in on it. It's not going to serve you. That's what it comes down to. It's not going to serve you. They talked a lot about hate crimes in it. Jussie Smollett, they reenacted the Jussie Smollett case, which when it's like reenact, you just see how crazy and absurd his story was. And people bought into it. Hook, line, and sinker. People just bought into it. Everyone is buying into this. When like any thinking person would go, that sounds really extreme. Really? You go over the details of the Jussie Smollett case? It's like, no way. So they brought on Wilfred Riley, who I had on my podcast. And as this was going on, I was like, they should bring on Wilfred Riley. I said to my wife, and then right away, Wilfred Riley came on, who wrote Hate Crime Hoax. I talked about it in an earlier podcast. And it's essentially one of the thesis of the book. It's a really fascinating book, is that there are more fake hate crimes than real hate crimes in America. That's crazy. More fake hate crimes than real hate crimes in America. So there is an incentive to fake a hate crime. What is the incentive? It could be monetary. It could be fame. If you are a victim, you are rewarded. That is poison to a society. You cannot incentivize victimhood because it'll be a race to the bottom. And that is not going to build up a society. Talking about all the ways you've been wrong. Wilfred Riley, they didn't mention how much they paid him. My guess is they didn't pay him a dime because Wilfred Riley will talk because he believes in his ideas, and he won't just talk for the grift. He came on my podcast. I didn't pay him. But if Robin DiAngelo would come on my podcast, I would have to pay her. Yeah, but she wouldn't come anyway. So he did bring on, Matt Walsh did bring on Robin DiAngelo, who's like, one of the big ones, her and Ibram X. Kendi. It just shows that there's zero coherence in her thinking. She is one of the thought leaders, and there's just no coherence in her thinking. He brings on one of his producers, a black guy, and just like gives him cash. And then she like runs to her purse and gives him $30 or something like that. Like, she's just not sorted out. And these are the people who are leading. I talked to so many teachers in like 2021, 2022, who were just like, I love white fragility. Schools were making it mandatory reading for all like professional development. Well, her career is going to be over after this. It's been exposed. And it's like, who saw this as nonsense from the beginning and who didn't? And if you didn't, if you bought into this and you bought into white fragility and stuff, like, what got you to do that? And then how are you going to make sure that that kind of stuff, you don't buy into dangerous, crazy nonsense in the future? And if you did buy into it, then or you didn't buy into it, I'm sorry, then why didn't you? Maybe you just like have like a good common sense. Where are your blind spots that maybe you would buy into something though? Like, always challenge yourself. But the Robin DiAngelo one, I mean, she's nuts. Like the producer was this guy, Ben, I think was his name. And she's like, do you want me to go get some money? He's like, won't turn down cash. Like, you're just like a normal guy. And these people talk in ways that aren't normal. It's not like a normal person. It's like, it's like they are programmed. It sounds and looks like they're programmed. And part of that is because you can't ask questions. Privilege preserving epistemic pushback. That's one of the things they call it. So like, you can't actually push back. You can't actually ask questions. So what happens if you can't ask questions? You just become a zombie. You get dead eyes. And a lot of the people there were so certain of their self and so certain of their morality, they just had dead eyes and they just can't ask questions. Following down this road and you just don't ask questions. There's toward the end, he runs a DEI meeting or seminar, and the group was just like bragging about how they cut out people from their lives. I cut out my racist mom and dad, and I cut out my brothers and sisters. It's like Daryl Davis, who I've also had on the podcast twice. Like, Daryl Davis sat and befriended and shared love, like really like poured into members of the Ku Klux Klan. And that got them to give up the ideology. You think cutting someone off from your life is going to enlighten them about their wicked ways? They were bragging about cutting people off. I had friends who cut off like their parents because they posted something that was against George Floyd. It's really dark. Like, love people through this. Form relationship with people. Help them to see the error of their ways. Understand why they think what they think. Why do you think these racist thoughts that you have? And then just get them. The same way that you'd want to give like extra rope to like a woke person because they're going to hang themselves because it's not coherent. Racism is incoherent too. So you do the same thing. The way you treat these anti-racists is the same way you treat a racist. I mean, I would even say, calling anti-racist, call it neo-racism because it is racism. It's belief that one group is superior or inferior to another based on race, buying into the social construct of race, okay, as like a very important thing, right? Like, your skin color is really important. So you actually approach the anti-racist the same way that you approach the racist, which is just asking them questions, giving them the room to expose what they think, gently challenge them, and then as you challenge them, it's going to get revealed that it's nonsense and doesn't hold up. But a lot of this was I think the big thesis of this was really about the profiting off of individuals' guilt. Guilt is a really tough thing to deal with. If you've been guilty, you've done something in your past, and you just have so much guilt over it. To profit off of people's guilt is really, really ugly. As opposed to grace, there's so little grace in the anti-racist, woke kind of ideology. So little grace. And grace is such a beautiful thing. It's like the good treatment that you probably don't deserve. It's so loving. There's not enough of that. But in closing, like, I think it exposes, like, this is, as Elon Musk calls it, it's a mind virus. At the very least, use curiosity as a tool to fight this. Okay, if something is like in your conscience saying like, maybe this isn't good, maybe it's not. So tap into your curiosity. I hope that added some nuance to my thoughts on the film. If you see the film, let me know other things that you thought would be pertinent to talk about, or things that stood out to you. But that's my kind of breakdown of the film. Thank you for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments section if it's on YouTube, or you can always email me at cylinderradio@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much.